Hello, welcome back to the Time to Dice 1 Round Damage Challenge. Last time, we put the Animist under the microscope to see how much damage they could possibly do in a single round. And while that experiment definitely broke our expectations, we're not done testing the limits of the game just yet, because today, we're turning our eyes to one of Pathfinder 2e's most infamous heavy hitters, the Barbarian. On paper, the Barbarian is all about raw power, between their heavy focus on strength and rage giving them a flat damage to all their strikes. They're often seen as one of the heaviest hitting classes in the game. But we're not here to talk about how a class performs on paper. In this video, we're going to find out the Barbarian's deadliest instinct, stack up its biggest bonuses, and calculate how much destruction we can cause in one round of unfiltered fury. So grab your D12s, start raging, and let's find out how much damage a Barbarian can really do in a single round. So, before we start putting this character together, I have some predictions. Well, actually, I'm writing this section after the build's already complete, and recording it even after that, but you'll have to trust me that these are the predictions that I had when we started. You can trust me, right? Would I lie to you? The Barbarian has one of the highest raw damage ceilings of any martial class. Rage alone gives it a flat boost to every strike that it does, and crits doubling that rage bonus make the Barbarian hit like a truck. That said, I'm expecting the class to fall a little short of the spellcasting classes, who can layer on multiple damage buffs, rider effects, and grant enemies weaknesses all in turns prior. The Barbarian might swing the biggest hit with a single weapon, but without spells stacking on top of each other, keeping up with magical burst combos is going to be tough. Still, if any martial can brute force their way onto the leaderboard, it's probably this one. So let's see just how far pure rage can take us. Alright, quick rules refresher for anyone new to the series. This is Bob. Bob is immortal and needs punishment. As always, the time limit is 1 round. That's our turn, then Bob's turn. Or Bob's turn, then our turn if we're feeling fancy. Any effect that involves a dice roll will be based off of what we pick as the worst possible result for Bob. We're looking to see just how much damage we can squeeze out of this, regardless of how lucky we'd have to be to actually achieve that outcome in actual gameplay. For our Ancestry, we're once again going to go with Duskwalker Orc, because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. From the Orc side, we're picking up 3 key feats. Lifeblood's Call once again rewards us for fighting on the edge by adding a damage bonus to our melee strikes based on our wounded and doomed values. The closer we are to going down, the harder we hit. And this time, we're going to pick up Orc Ferocity, letting us stay standing when we should hit 0 hit points, which shouldn't matter to this build at all, except that it leads to our next feat, Rampaging Ferocity, letting us turn that extra burst of survival into an extra strike, and as it turns out, extra strikes do extra damage. Then, from the Duskwalker side, we're picking up Quietus Strikes, which gives us a small, steady bit of spirit damage to all of our strikes, just enough to keep every swing just a little bit harder. Our biggest decision for Barbarian is, of course, our Instinct. Each instinct tweaks our rage bonus just a bit and usually gives us a unique perk in exchange for a few restrictions. Some might force us to fight unarmed, and others stop us from using certain buffs or magic entirely. For this build, we're actually going with the one that gives us the smallest rage bonus, the Blood Rager instinct. Why would we do that? Well, remember how I said the biggest challenge for Barbarians is the lack of spells? Well, the Blood Rager instinct throws that weakness out the window. This instinct not only gives us access to spellcasting, but lets us cast those spells while raging by adding the rage traits to all of our spells. We even get to choose between the Arcane and Divine spell list. For this run, we'll be sticking with the Divine spell list, because we've already got a pretty potent combo lined up from the Animist build. Of course, it's not all upsides. We're not full casters, so we only reach up to 8th rank spells. And every time we cast one of those spells, we take a hit to our vitality by increasing our drain condition. So while we can definitely make this combo work, we're going to have to change a couple things up. All in all, Barbarians get 11 class fleet slots. 4 of these have to be locked into our spellcasting setup: Blood Rager Dedication, Rising Blood Magic, Surging Blood Magic, and Exalted Blood Magic. These are feat taxes for our spellcasting, but on the bright side, they also increase our rage bonus. Then, to free ourselves up from our Blood Rager archetype a little bit earlier, we're going to get an extra Blood Rager feat, anything we can grab, just to meet the exit requirement of the archetype. That way, we can pick up the Time Edge Dedication and Future Spell Learning to add haste to our spell list a little bit earlier. This leaves us room for actual Barbarian options: Come and Get Me, Vengeful Strike, and Brutal Critical. Come and Get Me and Vengeful Strike give us a couple more options to hit Bob in a round, and Brutal Critical gives us more damage on all of our crits, which is all of our strikes for us, so that's helpful. This leaves us with 1 lonely fleet slot still open, but since it's a level 1 slot, there's not much worth stressing over this. Usually when we have a slot open, I stress over how we could possibly fill it, but usually leaving a feat unfilled makes me feel like I'm missing something, but in this case, I think we're safe saying it's not going to make or break our damage total regardless. Alright, we've already talked more about spells than I ever thought we would in a Barbarian video, but now, let's see what spells actually meant the cut for our Barbarian repertoire. Our cantrips, 1st and 2nd rank spells are all empty. Just make sure that one of your cantrips requires a spell attack roll. Then we're going to pick up Anointed Ground in rank 3, Warrior's Regret and Bloodspray Curse at rank 4, Infuse Vitality and Seal Fate at rank 5, Organ Sight and Inevitable Disaster at rank 6, Haste and Inexhaustible Cynicism at rank 7, and Sacred Form and Suspended Retribution at rank 8. Alright, with all that setup out of the way, let's return to the story of Bob. When we last left him, Bob had been driven out of a spiritual oasis by our animist build, and worse yet, he'd been betrayed by the very cat he'd hoped to befriend. After being beaten all the way to unconsciousness, Bob was handed over to the authorities where he could finally pay for his misdeeds, where the judges decreed that he would face trial by combat. And not just any combat. Bob was forced to stand face to face with the strongest warrior in all the land, our nameless Barbarian. The next thing Bob knows, he's being marched into a massive coliseum, the stands packed with people cheering for his inevitable demise. Across the arena, he sees our Barbarian, standing tall, covered in dust and blood from a dozen previous fights, and looking more annoyed than tired. The crowd roars, Bob swallows hard, and before he can even think about running, the match begins. Our Barbarian opens the fight in much the same way our Animist did, by casting Seal Fate, which Bob critically fails. This slaps him with weakness 3 to piercing damage, but Bob is far too distracted by the thousands of people who showed up specifically to watch him get obliterated to even understand what just hit him. Next up, our Barbarian casts Warrior's Regret, and layers on Exhaustible Cynicism on top of it. Bob is suddenly facing every questionable decision that has brought him to this exact moment. And unfortunately for him, that list is longer than this fight is going to be. From here, the next couple of rounds are dedicated entirely to setup. We can go down the line casting Bloodspray Curse, Infuse Vitality, Haste, Organ Sight, Suspended Retribution, making sure to set the trigger to whenever Bob uses an athletics action. We also prime Inevitable Disaster to call forth a grand cosmic calamity scheduled to drop on Bob in exactly 3 rounds. And on our next round, we cast Sacred Form, which because we're a worshipper of Darjumbe, gives us a magical attack that mimics a Great Pit in damage die size, damage type, and traits. And finally, we activate our Rage. Oh, and by the way, we forgot to mention, we cast Anointing Ground on the Coliseum every morning, just as our regular routine. At this point, Bob finally realizes that if he doesn't do something, he's about to take yet another legendary beating. So in a panic, he makes the only move he can think of. He tries to trip us. Unfortunately for Bob, trip is an athletics action, which means it immediately triggers our Suspended Retribution. That deals 90 mental damage, plus 1 more from Anointing Ground. And since Bob being Bob means he critically fails, that damage doubles, hitting him for a grand total of 182 damage right out of the gate. Now at this point, that kind of damage landing on Bob shouldn't surprise anyone. What does come as a surprise to the crowd though, is Bob actually succeeds at the trip attempt. In fact, he critically succeeds. Bob trips our Barbarian, slamming him into the ground and dealing 1d6 damage on the way down. Could Bob's luck finally be turning around? Well, no. Because critically succeeding on an attack against us triggers a free action Vengeful Strike. This lets us immediately make a retaliation strike for free. Our Sacred Armament Strike alone critically hits for 138 damage, and that's before we add on anything else. Next we layer on +1 from Quietest Strikes, +1 from Anointing Ground, +8 from Lifeblood's Call, +8 from our Rage, +12 from Infused Vitality, and +42 from Organ Sight. All of which that doubles thanks to the crit. Then we tack on 12 more from Brutal Critical, and +2 from Seal Fate's Weakness to Piercing. Those don't double. When all's said and done, that single retaliatory strike clocks Bob for a grand total of 308 damage, which when combined with the damage from Suspended Retribution, brings our total damage after one action to 490 points of damage. So what does Bob do next? Well, fun fact. There's nothing in the trip action that says the target can't already be prone. So Bob, tactical genius that he is, decides to keep trying to trip us even though we're already prone. You know what they say about doing the same thing over and over again? The results tend to be the same. Bob trips us again and again. Each attempt does another d6 damage to us, but each one triggers 394 retaliation damage right back against Bob, since Organ Sight is no longer being taken into account. By the end of Bob's third action, he has successfully tripped an already fully prone target twice, and has taken 1,278 more damage for his triple. But Bob's turn isn't over yet. Thanks to the haste spell that we cast earlier, Bob is quickened, giving him one more action to strike or stride. Everything Bob has done so far has been a critical success, so Bob, feeling extremely confident despite all the gaping holes forming in his hit points, winds up and makes a strike against our Barbarian. And wouldn't you know it? Critical success. That's another vengeful strike from us, which means another 212 damage straight to Bob's ribcage. But that is where things get a little weird. Remember when we mentioned that every time we cast a spell, our drained value increases? Well, at this point, we've cast a lot of spells. We're sitting at drain 10 by my calculations, meaning 200 of our hit points are gone. And after eating all of those trip attempts, the critical hit from Bob, and all the attacks we've been in before, this critical hit is enough to drop us to 0 hit points. Or at least it should be. But we have a work ferocity. So instead of dropping, we stay standing at 1 hit point. And thanks to rampaging ferocity, that means we can make yet another strike. So go ahead and add on another 212 damage to Bob's growing collection of regrets. Bob's turn finally ends, which means it's time for him to take his end of turn damage as is tradition. He eats 16 damage from Warrior's Regret, 36 damage from Inexhaustible Cynicism, and 24 bleed damage from our Savage Critical. Add in the bonus of damage rolls from Anointed Ground, and that's 81 damage total just for finishing his turn. Then we get our turn. But from here on out, things get a lot simpler. We don't bother standing up from super prone. At this point, our mission is clear. Instead, we simply choose to swing our Great Pick 4 times. Each attack is a critical success, adding a whopping total of 848 more damage to Bob. And that finishes our turn. But not this video, because the crowd watching this is outraged that Bob had the audacity to fight dirty and trip us while we were already lying on the floor. And they decided to collectively intervene. They start hurling glass bottles at Bob, dealing 130 piercing damage, plus 6 more from Seal Fate and Anointed Ground. Who could have possibly foreseen this inevitable disaster? Bob goes unconscious, and our grand total of damage goes to 2,734 damage. So, how does this stack up against the Animist? Well, if you remember, the Animist clocked in at a grand total of 3,048 damage, which is about 314 more damage than we managed this time around. Now on paper, 314 damage sounds like a massive gap, and in any normal context, it absolutely would be. But when we're dealing with the numbers this big, 314 isn't actually all that much. It's a roughly 10% increase in damage, which in practical terms is the difference between killing 5 Tarrasques in one round and killing 5.6 Tarrasques in one round. What? You don't use the totally practical number Tarrasque killed measurement unit? Typical. So, yes, the Animist takes the crown so far, but our Barbarian's performance is absolutely nothing to scoff at. If anything, both of these builds prove just how absurdly powerful things can get when we push Pathfinder's mechanics to their absolute breaking point. Bob may not appreciate the lesson, but we certainly do. And with that, we've reached the end of today's deep dive into rampaging rage and catastrophic crits. If you like this video, you know what to do. Hit the like button, comment below, and subscribe to the channel so that you never miss a video. But that's all we've got this time. Till next time, keep rolling high, and we'll catch you in the next one.